Welcome. My name is Amal Matar, and I represent the Human Genomics and Genetics group in SIENNA. I am from Uppsala University Center for Research Ethics and Bioethics, and my colleagues are here, Mats and Hansen. Unfortunately, Santa could not make it, and I am glad that my colleagues have described more about the SIENNA project, so I can focus on just the key findings and the operational tools that we have, more of like results. And first, I will be talking about the proposal for a patient ombudsman and an ethical self-assessment tool. And that was the deliverable by Mats Hansen. And the motivation for this work was that I think it was reflected in the introduction as well, is that the ethical reflection should not be something patchwork, but rather something continuous. So we can think about it as a process, and it should be continuous while doing science as well, research, and to accommodate changes in moral culture. And as we all know, research involving both humans and animals are pretty well regulated. There are lots of ethical guidelines, both at the European level, international level, and local level. And also clinical applications are regulated as well. There are laws, there are professional codes of conduct, and best practices. However, an area that's not very well regulated is that lacks both ethical and governance is experimental treatment or novelty treatment that's being used in genomics and genetics. And that's why we have suggested that an ethical self-assessment tool for researchers could be a good idea, especially when researchers are considering innovative treatments and whether they should use it on patients or not. And the idea is to encourage or foster culture among ethical culture among researchers, as well as nurture ethical judgment and individual responsibility. So how does this tool work? Basically, it's like two major questions. One is identifying stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? What sorts of interests are there? And what kind of conflicts of interest between these different stakeholders? And in order to balance such different conflicts and interests, a principled approach is being used by researchers. So they basically will use this as a self-assessment to answer questions. And these questions are a principle of, they are reliant on a set of ethical values like autonomy, non-maleficence and beneficence, justice, respect for privacy, freedom of scientific inquiry, attribution, intellectual property. And Matt will be discussing this in more detail in the Human Genomics and Genetics session this afternoon. There's also a proposal for a patient ombudsman, and that's a form of a governance system. And the proposal is to have it instituted at a European level or at an international level. So something like the European Medical Agency or the WHO. And it has two main functions. One for the scientists and researchers if they want to seek advice on the use of compassionate treatments, and as well as for patients if they want to appeal decisions that are made at a local, national or local ethics committee. The second thing that I'll be talking about as a key finding is that a proposal for an international code of conduct for data sharing in genomics. And that was for the deliverable 5.2 for SIENNA. And in this, we have adopted a mixed method. Initially, we have started with a literature review, just trying to map out what the gaps and the needs within human genomics and genetics, and identify relevant existing code of conduct. And we'll try to avoid being redundant and repetitive, because human genomics and genetics, as you all know, is very well established and there are lots of guidelines. After that, we use those identified existing code of conducts and we synthesize them to draft a preliminary code of conduct. And through the literature, we identified specific questions that this code of conduct should answer and address. And after doing this, we invited an expert of panel to look at the preliminary code of conduct, as well as answer these questions that we identified through the literature, and give us advice on how to answer them and how to apply them in the code of conduct. And we did that. We had 16 experts. And after incorporating the changes from the input and the answers to the questions, then we sent out the code of conduct to be reviewed by SIENNA stakeholders. We had experts from the European Society of Human Genomics, Global Alliance for Human Genomics and Health, Human Genome Organization, as well as Genomics England. And the ethical code, the code is an ethical document. It's not a legal one. It's voluntary, of course, describes best practices. It's not a data protection code of conduct, and it involves both compliance and integrity-based approaches. And people who might be interested in this are researchers, data controllers, data management committees, as well as cloud service providers. We try to do the code of conduct to cover the data cycle from the time that the data subject, patient, or research participants give their data until they receive answers, findings, actionable findings through the research. And we have thought about a governance system that's being implemented or devised by Data Management Committee. And it will be addressing data collection issues, data storage, data transfer, and access, as well as breaching of data through, for example, through compelled disclosure. We also have provisions for data handling in low and middle income countries, as well as best practices for community engagement. The last thing I would like to present is how the legal aspects in human rights on human genomics and genetics, and this work has been done by Santa. Unfortunately, she could not be here with us today. And first, I would like to compare the legal principles that was proposed by Santa to our ethical principles that was proposed for the code of conduct. So, for example, Santa has proposed the right to genomic data, and that's why one of the reasons we decided to do a code of conduct for international data sharing is to encourage this right. Another thing is to protect privacy and integrity, and we have done this through a principle of respect for persons in the ethical code. Prohibits stigmatization, discrimination, and this is through a principle of protecting vulnerable population. The right to science, and the corresponding one to in the ethical code is the freedom of scientific inquiry. Lastly, the right to health, and this is where we have a fair share of benefits in the ethical code. Santa has proposed legal changes at an international level, at a European level, and at national level. And you can read more about this in her work. And there's also a policy brief on the SIENNA website. So at the international level, she proposed measures to enhance the right to science in human genomics and genetics, enhance the rights framework, human rights framework, to address the challenges as human genomic and genetic develops. At the European level, the idea of a right of data protection and the right to establishing a right to genomic data. Also to consider developing guidance and regulations on human genomics and genetics research. At a national level, she proposed that there should be effective compliance and enforcement of existing laws, as well as enhancing competence and capacity building. These are important links if you want to know more about our work for the SIENNA report and SIENNA policy. And acknowledgement, and thank you.